Welcome to the Liberty Collaborative, where the past meets the present in the fight for freedom. We uncover the roots of liberty, spotlight the people who shaped it, and explore what it takes to preserve it today. If you're ready to think deeper, stand stronger, and act with purpose, you're in the right place. Let's reclaim what matters most.
And good Thursday morning, everybody. It is April 9th, 2026, and you are listening to the Liberty Collaborative podcast. And we're running a little bit of a light show today. It's just the Coyle and Bowman show today. Other gentlemen are traveling and lifting dead weight at the gym. So good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Aaron, and good morning, everyone listening in. Aaron, we've been doing this about more than a year now, haven't we? I'm thinking about it, and just what fun we have.
Yeah, so exciting night last night at the Lakeside for the Lincoln Douglas dinner with the Coventry RTC and all the gubernatorial candidates here in the state and others that are running for different offices. And I don't know, it was pretty good. It was a good night.
It was a good night, Aaron. It was neat to have Kay Carl's new book, Douglas versus Marx. And I think, as you know, we sold a few. And I'll hold this up for our audience, anyone watching. But what was exciting was a lady homeschooling her son looked through it and just remarked how accessible and understandable it would be for her son. So it's neat to see the intended target being kids, as Kay Carl had indicated, play out in front of us. So that was fun, Aaron. And what was also fun for us is to see someone we have been working with for now, I'd say 6 months or so, about presenting. And he was the best candidate for, in this case, federal office. I think a lot of people felt he was the best speaker.
Yes, he was. It was that shining moment where you're just kind of like, wow, this is... that we've put time and energy into it. We don't charge. We spent our time with him. He grasped what we were saying. He's met with us multiple times, and to see where he was in a polo shirt and shorts at RTC meetings, what was that, Canterbury, Connecticut?
Yeah.
First time we saw him, to last night, he was the most polished, most presidential speaker up there. It was probably one of the shortest outside of you. There were some people up there that were very long-winded. And before I forget, if you go right down to that link there on the screen, you can pick up Kay Carl's book. So it was a nice moment. And then to hear the feedback from the people saying, boy, what a difference.
Yeah, that was really neat. You know, Aaron, for our listeners out there, what's so interesting, and we talk about all this time in Wins Lab, is this thing has changed the game. People are expecting you to get to the point, say something interesting, generally that affects them or is about them or refers to something in their lives, and get to it and be, most importantly, authentic. Right. And the great thing about what this candidate did running for Congress in the 2nd District against an incumbent Democrat was, this guy is the American dream. He's a first-generation citizen from Mexico, whose family, faith, hard work, football coach, and so heartfelt. That's what it really came across, of how proud he is to be running for Congress against an entrenched Democrat who votes, against, I think we would argue, people's self-interest in terms of increased taxes and mandating electric vehicles on them and all this other stuff. So yeah, it was a great night. And, for everyone listening, it was the Lincoln Douglas celebration event, dinner in Coventry, Connecticut. And we always recognize the importance of recognizing the unique distinction, as Kay Carl calls it, of the Republican Party, formed by Abraham Lincoln, really built by Frederick Douglass, and the point of view of basic human rights, every man created equal. So it was neat to celebrate that and see other people embracing the distinction and pride in having that legacy. And by the same token, Aaron, getting to our subject today, this recent article about the DNC admitting they have a message problem.
True.
Well, they have a message problem because they have a principle problem, which is either A, no principles, or as Kay Carl said, their real foundation comes out of Karl Marx.
Correct. And I think people are seeing that. It seems to me that you're going to have those that are on the extreme left, just like you're going to have on the extreme right. But I think the ones that are more of a centralist view, maybe a little not so far extreme left leaning, they're not out there protesting no king, stuff like that. You're maybe the old school typical Democrat, however you want to label them. They're starting to look at the party and say, like you've heard others like RFK Jr., my party left me. They've changed, and they don't have a foundation that they can lean upon or principles like we have with Lincoln and Douglas. And unfortunately for them, people are waking up. I've heard people say that this generation right now, the students that are in college, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings are more conservative now than ever before.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it with this young candidate from Brooklyn, Connecticut, who wants to run, very spiritual and very, when you say conservative for our listeners and viewers, I think it's important to make the distinction that, and Aaron and I feel very strongly this way, and others we work with, is that values unite and issues divide. And we all share our founding values and constitutional principles. We can argue over legitimate policy differences, but to assail our opponents by calling them names, by saying they're a threat to democracy, I think people are starting to see through it and say, when you're forcing boys into my daughter's locker room, into my daughter's sports program, she's worked her whole life to try and get a scholarship, say, in some sport, and now Bobby decides he wants to run track or do whatever. When you see these things, or in our state, the massive attack on private property, people start to say, look, I'm starting to see through the rhetoric here. And of course, if you look at Mondami in New York City, they just announced that virtually every program in the city will be looked through a racial equity lens. And even liberal writers are describing it as sort of bizarre and Lenin-esque, where now we're not going to look at what's correct and fair. We're going to look at what we deem, in this case, we being him and his people, to be fair. So it really is crazy. But Aaron, back to this article we talked about, the Democrats apparently admitted that they don't know what to say.
Right.
I mean, that was the gist of it, right?
Yeah. And let's just for those of you who are watching that are online, I will post this on X and on the YouTube channel. So you can go to the link yourself and read this from the Epic Times, and you can actually pull up the DNC playbook. There's a link to it. And as you know, Chris, as we were talking offline, as I was coming back from the gym, since that's why I'm half a mess here, we were talking how the Democrats flip-flop. First it's, DEI, and then it's, we're trans this, and then we're pushing that. And it's like they change like the New England weather. Yesterday it was 65, today it's 40, right? Unfortunately, it's good for us as Republicans because we can look back to Lincoln and Douglas. We can look back to our founding fathers, the values, the principles that unite us. And that's the party that we are. We wanted women to vote. We got rid of slavery. They don't have any of that to stand on. And I think that's why we see so much flip-flopping with them to where, okay, let's get behind this because maybe we can get a few voters, or let's open up the borders because we're going to give all this free stuff away and that'll give us some voters, because they don't have a strong message. They don't have anything to stand for. And one of the things that you always bring up that I think is just a fantastic idea is when you're talking with somebody, we know as Republicans what we stand for. And instead of all the time bashing the other side, or they suck, or they're bad, or I can do better, the simple question is, well, what do you stand for?
Right.
And they don't have an answer because they don't know what they stand for because, again, they change like the weather.
Well, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, and we've seen this in many of the Black communities around the country, where Chicago's a great example. They're protesting the mayor saying, you've sold us out. Our community centers are now filled with illegal immigrants. I don't know what's happened. This was more last year, but they're basically seeing that they have now moved on. And now think about it. It's like cheap dates. They were all into this DEI stuff. Well, not so much anymore. It doesn't work. And it was illegal. This whole thing about abortion. Remember before the election that Trump's number one thing, he will ban abortion. And I actually have relatives, family. I talked to my son, whose wife was convinced that the U.S. was going to change. So all those proved again to be lies, and they figured out they're not popular. They're not fixing any problem. And to your point, now they're searching for a message. Meanwhile, Soros is funding these No King protests.
Yep.
You look at all these primarily white old people with bizarre things, including death threats against the president, all sorts of bizarre stuff put, from climate justice to whatever. And everyone's kind of looking at him going, what exactly are you mad about?
Right.
What specific king-like thing did Trump do that you believe no court, the legislature, no one has addressed? Yes, they disagree with some of his acts as the executive branch. That's legitimate. But this idea that somehow democracy is just, I think people are perhaps viewing it as now bordering on bizarre.
I agree, Chris. And here's the thing that really gets me. As you know, for our listeners, Chris and I, well, I guess I'll speak for myself. I really was not, and neither of us were really into politics.
No.
I didn't get involved 100% until 2024. Yes, I went to rallies. Yes, I went to protests when they got rid of the religious vaccination requirement here in Connecticut. But you have people that are out there protesting no kings. When we've had one party rule in this state for 40 years, you have a max exodus out of the state. Our taxes are going up. The Democrats are a supermajority running everything, but yet nobody's there protesting our electric rates or the fact that a 16-unit building can be built right next to my house in the suburbs because they now passed that housing bill 8002. It really blows my mind how people get so worked up about the national stuff, but the stuff that you could change as an individual, the government that's closest to you, your local government, your state government, nobody has any idea what's going on. And just to put this in a little more context, this article we're talking about, this isn't just a one-page PDF. According to the article, on March 28th, when this plan came out, it was a 200-plus page campaign playbook that basically says we have no plan. So this is a big deal, and none of us talking about it.
But wait a minute, and I brought this up last night. Remember how we had a president whose career path was a community organizer? Well, the Democrats absolutely in their playbook. I looked at it. As you know, I showed a copy of the cover last night and some remarks I made at the event. It is a lot of really well-organized blocking and tackling, how to get movements and groups and leadership. So it's got really, and in our state, they outnumber us in terms of getting early votes. They do what's called vote banking, where they know they've got certain number of votes in so they can concentrate on the remaining, get out the vote.
Mm-hmm.
So what I commented, Aaron, is they've got all the mechanics of how to run around and get people riled up, but they have no message.
Right.
And they admit they have no message. So the query now is, so does the message include why the other side is so bad? Probably includes some of that, or they're looking at that. Or what I find amazing is now they're pivoting back to talk about affordability and, being able to make a fair living, about pocketbook issues. And I query how, obviously being hypocritical or not recognizing that what you said before matters. These people now have the gall, let's take Connecticut, to act like they're worried about affordability when they created the problem. So this is like an arson, lighting a house on fire and then running over the fire department, getting his fire suit on and saying, hey, come on, guys, help me fight the fire. Well, you started it. It's mind-boggling. And then the solution is to take more people's money and redistribute it the way they deem fit through their political lens, probably their friends and insiders. So to me, that too is sort of amazing that Democrats now are trying to lay the mantle of we're the party that will solve the quote affordability problem.
Right. And that's a great point. And that's something that outside of us talking with a few others, I've never really heard anybody come up and say, wait a second, time out, especially here in Connecticut. You've been in power for 40 plus years, whatever it is. And these are all your bills that you've raised, you've passed as the supermajority, regardless of what the minority Republican Party has to say. They all vote no against stuff. It still passes. And then, like you said, they have the audacity to turn around and say, oh, wait a second, we're going to fix the problem that we created. And nobody acknowledges that. Like, you created it. You obviously can't fix it because you haven't. Lamont's been what? He's going for his 4th term, and now he says he's going to work on affordability. Where were you the last 3 terms?
Yeah.
And I think that's why people are waking up and starting to say, yeah.
I hope they're waking up, Aaron. I worry that in our state, in many places, people are moving away from party labels.
They are.
They're more and more unaffiliated. That said, most polls show that people skew in terms of view, if you will, more toward the liberal point of view, a Democrat, or a more conservative point of view, Republican. However, what I'm concerned about here is the Democrats have gotten so good at misdirection, mislabeling, using Saul Lewinsky, attack the other person, accuse them of doing exactly what you're doing. And I think at times, I don't want to say it works like it worked in past tense, but I think it creates a challenge for Republicans to get their message out and point out to people that they should get the facts. Let's take an example. This bill in Connecticut, others like them around the country, have these wonderful egalitarian titles, names, in our case, housing bill, as if the Democrats, politicians, are going to enter the housing business. Well, last time I looked, there's land that someone owns. That land is generally regulated under some sort of zoning, which everyone knows is a basis that has created amazing wealth. What did Betsy McCoy say last night? 68% of the people in Connecticut own homes.
Correct.
Own their own homes. So an amazing generation of wealth because of an organized, systematic approach to using land. So somewhere, somehow, which is true, we know that it is harder for people to afford a first home and so forth based on a number of factors. But suddenly now we have a housing crisis, an affordability crisis. And you know, Aaron, we've talked about this. And I challenge anyone listening ever, anywhere, in terms of Connecticut, to come on and debate us. But the numbers tell the story, right? About 3,500, quote, homeless, unhomed. Now, put aside how many of those are already in state institutional programs or some sort of help. 3,500 illegal immigrants in Connecticut, estimates somewhere around 150,000. Some people say more, some people, but call it 150.
Yep.
Third number, 1.1 to 1.6 billion spent in 2024, I believe, or 5. And again, there are people arguing it's 1 billion, it's 1.7, but let's call it 1.5 again spent. Where do we think these people are living? These exactly. 150,000, and who do you think's paying for their rent? We are.
Yep.
So then the government goes, well, we're going to pay more tax on your electric bill. So they've torqued the housing market, and I've shared on this show before what occurred in LA a few months ago. The LA Times admitted that rents were coming down. Why? Because the number of illegal immigrants in California was coming down. So they create the problem. We are about third or fourth most expensive electricity in continental United States, soon to be number one.
Correct.
So they do all this, and then they have unfunded mandates. Hartford says the towns must do this, and the towns raise property taxes. So why would you want to live in a house that you can't afford to live in, can't pay the taxes, right? Can't pay the electric bill. So that's just a little example of how these people, to your point, 40 years in rule, have created the problem, and then try and act like, again, the arson who's coming to put out the house fire he just started.
Yep. And now, Chris, those are all great points. And just so this doesn't seem one side, I'm going to play a little bit of the devil advocate here because we're coming into about 10 minutes left of our show. For those of you who are new here, who are online watching, thank you. We try to get about a half-hour show in, bring you as much content and context as possible. But Chris, when you and I got into State Central, when we got elected, was it last year? We're on our second year now. We said, well, what's the plan? Because we agreed that the Republican Party was lacking in messaging here, at least in the state, or they were afraid to say why they're proud to be a Republican. And they had to kind of dance around the old fire. And that's when we started saying, you know, especially you and Kay Carl came up with the Frederick Douglass engagement method and being able to say, wait, hold on. Here's our founding of our party, Lincoln and Douglas. Here's what they did. They brought the country back together. Look at the life, liberty message of Frederick Douglass and what he stood for, what he wrote about. And when you start talking about that, like I've said before here, I would go to a group and I was the only Republican in there. And I'd say, listen, I'm different. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. I look to Lincoln and Douglas. I believe in what Douglas stood for and what brought this party together. And that's what the message needs to be. People need to be unapologetic for being Republicans. Right. They need to say, hey, here's our values. Here's our principles. I'll debate you all day on these because these are tried and true. And when we got into State Central, we said, okay, well, what's the plan? What's our messaging? And if you don't have a plan, at least you have a plan for a plan. Remember that conversation we had, which was comical, but at least now we've got two different committees. You're on one for rebuilding RTCs. I'm on one for messaging. We're getting the ball going in the right direction. But again, it's not just the Democrats. We flounder too, because how many emails do you get? Well, this side's bad, donate money, or this guy sucks, donate money. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to keep donating.
Well, Aaron, you and I found out a long time ago from Michael and Stephanie out in Colorado, Kay Carl, that we know when you first of all say to people, look, don't ask me about the guy with the orange hair. Don't ask me about the president's cognitive ability. I don't want to talk about personality politics.
Correct.
It's distracting. It's a media freak show. And we also tell people that George Washington warned our country about the divisiveness of political parties. What we zero in on is let's talk about our shared values and principles. And where one right ends, another right begins, and we can have a civil discourse. And that has opened up more doors. And I think finally, we will embrace debate, and we teach people to embrace disagreement in a civil way, the way it used to be done. None of this disparaging your opponent and that kind of thing. You just don't need to. And so, you know, as I look, and you know, Aaron, I quoted Frederick Douglass last night, but you recall, and for those listening, I held up a silver dollar and I tapped it, I turned it over, I looked at it, all without saying a word, but I showed the human emotion of having that dollar. That was Frederick Douglass's description of what it felt like to earn money that was his. For the first time as a slave, he worked for other people, and in Maryland in the boat yards with his slave master, Auld, he had an agreement that he, after a certain amount of money, he could keep his own. Well, think about it today, Aaron. We said it last night. It's not until next month that people in Connecticut will start keeping their own money. So 1/3 of the year, you're working for Hartford, Connecticut. You're working for the government who wants to take more and distribute it. So I think once we have that level, if you will, foundation in which to debate, we'll welcome any debate from anyone.
Absolutely. And just a quick shout out to Just a Normal Mom. Thank you for catching us and watching us today. We appreciate it. And Chris, those are fantastic points. And I really hope those that are listening to this reach out to us, send us an email, find us and shoot us a DM on X or on YouTube and say, hey, I want to know more about this. I want to be able to articulate like you guys do about being proud to be a Republican, because as Kay Carl puts it, when he's on here, he said it before, this helps mend families, because you end up having families that are very divided. And when you get rid of all of that political noise and the personalities and just say, hey, well, these are my values and principles. What are yours? Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And the thing you always say, where one right ends, another right begins. That is a very true statement. And there's absolutely no reason why we can't have those discussions around that.
Yeah.
So you who are listening can pick up on that and reach out to us, because we'd love to have a conversation with you.
Well, and Aaron, as we wrap this up, we do share common values. We share constitutional principles. Think about it. Everyone values their own personal property. Mm-hmm. And, I wrote, it was an award-winning essay a few years ago called My Car. And I pointed out that in America, the car is probably the most important possession of anyone. They customize it with wheels, tires, window tint, decals, colors, shapes. There's thousands of songs about cars. There's a band called The Cars.
Yep.
Right? Cars are part. So my car is a very personal property reflection of a person's individuality. But what happens, I pointed out in the essay, when it becomes no longer exactly your car, because the government tells you how big the engine can be or what kind of fuel can be in it. And we might look to the Yugoslavian Yugo. Remember that little car? Yep. It was I think the only car, or at least at that time, made under communist rule. Today it's a collector's item because it was such a piece of junk. In any event, my car, your car, no longer becomes your car when it's regulated to the extent that you really don't own it. You're owning it because someone said, okay, we will allow you to own a car. So forget the car companies. They're not going to build what people want. They're going to build what they're told. So the reason I bring it up, Aaron, is if people start with a shared idea that everyone loves their own personal property, they love their own right to free speech, and so forth, we agree that the amendments, the rights are shared by everyone alike.
Correct.
And so if we start there and then ask basic questions about, well, how do we strengthen that right? In our case, allowing people additional freedom to keep more money of what they make to spend on their children, a vacation, improving their house, getting an education. And when people tell you, particularly like you and I, you're not paying your fair share, or if you make more, not only we're going to tax it, but then you put it in the stock market, we'll tax that gain. Mm-hmm. And if you gift it, we'll tax that. And when you pass away, we'll tax that. So we've really gotten into a tax nightmare, Connecticut, which kind of is, I think, in a race with New York, New Jersey, California, and Illinois for I should say the bottom. It is the bottom, but it's the top of the tax states in the nation.
It is. And we're coming up, Chris, on 30 minutes here. So I'm just going to say these last two closing things. For those of you in Connecticut, just remember, if you want to return bottles, you need an ID, but you don't need one to vote. And speaking of voting, we've got midterms coming up. And I think I'm going to say this on every episode between now and November. Make a party out of it. Get your neighbors, get your friends, your families, make a day of it. Go out to vote. Bring 3 or 4 people with you. Go out to lunch afterwards. Post your photos on social media, because we have a problem of getting out the vote. And no matter what our messaging is, if we don't get our fannies off the couch and go vote, take advantage of early voting, bank those votes, make sure your neighbor goes out, your friends, your kids, if they're over 18, then we're not going to change anything. So
you're right. It's you're not a spectator. You got to be a participant. I'll cap it by saying this. It's one of my favorite quotes, and you probably memorized it by now. So, folks, in 1775, a writer was in the group of troops escaping the British and Hessian soldiers in New York. They followed George Washington across the Delaware, and Washington said, "Hey, Thomas Paine, I need a speech to rally the troops." In that speech, he used the term summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. And it was really meant to say, are you in? Will you defend this country? And most importantly, what this country stands for. And so my admonition, my prayer, my beseech to everyone listening and everyone who will listen to you is, don't be a summer soldier and sunshine patriot. Don't be a spectator. You got to be a participant in our freedom. So till next week.
Till next week. So thank you everybody for watching. We will be here next Thursday, 10:30 to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You have been listening to the Liberty Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Bowman, with Chris Coyle. We usually have two others with us that'll be here next Thursday. Thanks for listening. And remember, wait, where is it?
Stay woke.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Collaborative. If today's episode lit a fire or gave you clarity, share it. Be part of the movement. Subscribe, leave a review, and keep the conversation